I've used the extra week 5 in the Pathwork lecture 227, September 2025 schedule to summarize what this lecture contains. It felt like this was a very relevant lecture, considering that many of us feel that outer forces are beyond our control, that we're being pulled and tugged and controlled by things that we don't agree with, that don't align with our belief system. And this lecture, the change from outer to inner laws in the New Age, suggests that by shifting to a learning of our inner truth and reality, the inner law within us that we believe in, that we can better combat outer laws, outer realities that conflict with that divine knowing. It emphasizes that you do have freedom, inner freedom. That is hard for people to believe if they have latched on to outer events. So I use my hands a lot. I want to emphasize that we latch on to outer events and they drag us around. And it is important to develop the skill to release our attachment, not permanently, but to be able to release and then reattach so that we can get a sense of inner calm, inner peace, what we want, before we again try to engage with outer events, which are part of other people's inner reality, inner desires, self-will, etc. So if you can't detach even momentarily, yes, you're going to be dragged around by the reality of other people who can possibly manipulate you. So there is freedom from that, but it takes skill to develop it. The key word about what represents that inner freedom is attitude, outlook, perspective. Words, not word. I use attitude a lot because attitude is how you approach a problem, how you see it, how you choose to understand it. These are all controlled by you, whether or not you say to someone else how you came to a conclusion. There's an inner way you came to a conclusion. No matter how you say you feel, there's an inner way you feel that creates an attitude within you. So on to inner truth. This section of the lecture, I'm going to quote, it says, "No one can tell it to you. No one is right or wrong per se on that level." That can be easily misread to read, nobody's right or wrong, but that's not what it says. It says nobody is right or wrong on that level, referring to no one can tell you your inner truth. You may have misinterpreted it, but there is an inner truth that each one of us holds, and the adventure of being human is to uncover that. We think that some people have found it and others have not, and that may be true moment to moment. There may be more general agreement on what is truth than untruth, and yet each individual person sees things differently. I illustrate this by saying that if I describe a picture to you, unless you see the picture, you're taking my perspective of it, which could be fairly accurate, but it can't possibly impact you the way seeing the actual picture would impact you. I would have no way of knowing what you would be looking for, how you would be affected, what memories would be triggered. I know mine, I can relate mine to you. But even in relating mine, I'm not relating the entire context of my feelings. I'm just hitting the highlights of how something made me feel. So what I'm referencing here is that there is an inner truth that I know and an inner truth that you know, and communication is difficult. And when we hinge our actions on the communication skills of the other person, it's easy to go astray. Knowing our inner truth requires honesty. Not everyone is courageous enough to be honest. It's hard to be honest about what we feel because there's a feeling and then there's an understanding and then there's a knowing. There's a lot to that. So I can feel threatened. I can feel greedy. I can feel resentment, but that's not the whole story. The story starts with saying how I feel and then exploring the context of why I feel that way. So inner truth is not a soundbite. It's a very complex reality that is often unknown to the person. And this is what the work of analysis, self-analysis is about. Now, trauma, which is a form of shock, trauma creates blocks. It creates hardened parts of our tissues where we're afraid to move forward in life, where we're constantly running away and arching backwards, and the same thing happens in our mind, where we're afraid to think about some things because it was extremely painful at the time. This creates all kinds of blocks that will at some point need to be dissolved and worked through. This needs some help sometimes. Outer help can help us see how we're afraid of ghosts. We're afraid of monsters under the bed. We're afraid of re-experiencing something that was genuinely terrifying when we were 4 years old. But we're not 4 years old anymore. Yet there's a part of us that is immature and really connects with a 4-year-old. And that part may need to be re-educated, lovingly re-educated, basically given therapy. Outer help can help us with that process, cannot do it for us, cannot know our own life task. So someone today was sharing about how they understood that another person was undergoing a test and they wanted this and that. And I teased them about how they wanted to give the other person their answers instead of helping them find theirs, their own answers, the other person's. I have experienced this in therapy myself. People want so much to help that they think that supplying you with their answers will ease your pain and make it easier. And sometimes it just burdens you with their philosophy of life. And you try that for a while and that didn't work either. You can develop a form of scar tissue about experimenting. Experimenting is painful and time consuming and it doesn't work. And so I won't experiment anymore. I won't explore anymore. And yet that violates spiritual law and organic life. So another part of this lecture talks about how freedom and change are inseparable. So you can't have freedom if you're not willing to adapt and change. Now, if you see change as life, death, win, lose, it's going to be a problem. You're going to be fixated on something remaining exactly the way it was, that you wanted it to be that way. My invitation to you would be to think of anything in your life that had real meaning and imagine that you had to sit next to it the rest of your life. While it may have been life-changing and terribly important for a certain phase of development, 10, 20, 30 years later, it's not going to have the same effect. In fact, it's going to become limiting and constricting because you very likely have outgrown it, or you have grown sideways, or you have developed in other ways. This is what happens to relationships. We start off with an invisible concept, and then we grow and change as human beings, as we naturally do. And one day we wake up and realize that we have drifted apart. Instead of doing the work of finding out, where are you, where am I? And is there still a common goal here? We see only the differences. We see that the other person is holding us back or dragging us down, and we want our freedom. We want our freedom to continue changing. So inner freedom requires change, and that's how we find our inner truth. And it's not a one-time goal. It's not, I got it, now I can relax for the rest of my life. It's the job of our entire lives, simply because the inner truth is so complicated. We cannot find it all in one given lifetime. There's a spiritual law that fully inhabiting a state of consciousness is necessary in order to grow. And I'm going to translate that to the guide's teachings about thoughts and feelings, experiencing our thoughts and feelings fully. A thought or feeling is a state of consciousness. If we don't fully inhabit that state, we are not going to be able to, for our consciousness to grow. And that is why it is important to stop at the feelings that distress us. And instead of saying, for instance, I am afraid and going on, that we stop with I am afraid and figure out what we're afraid of. And the only way to do that is to go into the fear with our eyes open and look at it. For this, it's common to need somebody to hold your hand, whether that's a friend or a therapist or a neighbor or a colleague, but just someone there so that you don't get lost in the experience again and simply re-experience rather than experience based upon I'm not there the way I used to be there. I was afraid yesterday, but today is today, and I may have a different perspective. The ability to feel, to fully inhabit our thoughts and feelings and find out now what's different, now what can I see? Based on the fact that each thought and feeling leads to some place, which is where you are now. So it taught me something. I now have that learning. I can go back there and realize how imprisoned and entrapped I felt because I didn't have the knowing, but I know now. And therefore, I don't have to be afraid of becoming entrapped again. It won't happen that way again. I might get manipulated into that situation, but I have more experience. I have some knowing, and it won't be permanent. Whereas at the time, it felt like a permanent state of being. It felt hopeless, or I felt in despair. We can go back to that same experience with love and kindness and understanding for who we were at the time. And I have my own memories of this, of being young and stuck and passionately believing in something that was destructive. I can empathize with that part of myself, the young idealistic part of myself and the young selfish part of myself. And that's where the inner honesty needs to come in. Sometimes my holding on was selfish. It was more about me than the other person. I wanted something, so I dug in. Once I am able to admit that, it's much easier to relax and let go than it is when I thought it was all or nothing, life or death, me or you. So that's the spiritual law. And then the guide goes into how outer law actually parallels inner law. Society grows. Society changes. Sometimes it will change very, very rapidly, and sometimes it's glacial. And you swear it hasn't changed in 1,000 years, and some things have not. But outer law cannot be as flexible and organic as inner law. You're always going to be freer and more able to see the right in a given situation than an outer rule is going to be able to. So in a joking way, what I invite people to do is take any spiritual law, turn it into a practical law, see how you would apply it as a judge. How would you interpret it? And as we have seen in real life, it turns into reams and reams and reams of, not prejudice, precedent. It turns into custom. It turns into common law. It comes into, well, this is the way we handle it because we have no better way of handling it, which is not inner truth. It's just the limited reality of outer situations. So outer law will parallel inner law, but it's just not going to keep up with it. For instance, everyone knows divine truth. That's the Pathwork premise, is we're all divine beings, and we've got some part of us that is alive and divine. But we may not understand it. We may be afraid of it. It may feel like it makes us different than other people, so we hide it. Even if we see it, we may know that we don't have the skills to manifest it. And we're cowardly about practicing. We're cowardly about taking some steps. It's all or nothing. Either I do it perfectly or I don't do it at all. And then when we manifest it, what we're here on the planet for is to manifest false beliefs. So we're going to manifest it poorly, in a flawed way, and that's going to give other people an invitation to attack us. That's part of the dynamic of being human. The idea is the knowing. And to go back to the knowing rather the interpretation of the knowing. That's hard to do. It's a skill. It takes some time to develop. But here's three analogies of how I understand this. I like using analogies and metaphors because spiritual concepts are a little unwieldy sometimes. So there's a story about 6 wise men who were told to go find out what an elephant was. And most of you have heard this. The 6 wise men all come back and they've got wildly different stories about, depending on what part of the elephant they touched. So it's either a big leafy thing or a huge hose or a tree trunk or a little tiny whippet tail or a great big giant wall of wrinkly stuff, depending on what part they touched. With our limited human vision, we're not going to see all of divine truth. We're going to see a portion. It's important to be humble about what we have seen that we feel is true, and understand that others may have a different perspective, a different portion of that truth, and see if we can find a common meeting ground, if we can piece it together. The second one is that because of my granddaughter, the younger generation has a lot to teach us. My granddaughter had a fascination with Marvel movies, and I did not, even though I did as a kid. I've outgrown it. I don't have that now. But there's a place where you want to share the discussions and the interests of other people. So I went to Marvel movies. And lo and behold, all of a sudden I began to realize a connection between movie genres that I didn't really appreciate, apocalyptic movies that were violent or about the violence in nature in men. I began to see a development, a phase of development of these stories. I began to see where everybody had a glimpse of where we were going or where we've been, and they're weaving it together in a very complex way, unique to them. Also, frankly, based on the business model of movies, what will attract the most people. And that there were more and more, to my seeing things, there were more and more movies that were expressing a very strong piece of spiritual truth, cloaked in supervillains and CGI and so forth. But I began to see in current events, let us say, current cultural events, how people are trying to express divine truth in their own way. And perhaps I'm just humbler now than I used to be. It doesn't have to be my version of the truth. I began to appreciate that they have a vision, and this is how they were expressing it. Now, the short version of this is that there were a series of these kinds of movies that started emphasizing the idea that everybody has a superpower, but we only have one, and we don't know how to use it. And I thought, that's it. That's what we're all trying to do. We do all have a superpower, and we don't know how to use it effectively. And we're going to get in trouble with it. And we're going to use it badly. And we're going to use it for lower self goals and get reprimanded or imprisoned or punished. The idea is not to give up. The idea is to keep trying, to keep refining, and to keep focusing on what is the divine truth of that superpower I have, meaning in Pathwork terms, my divine light. So there's a way where people think that there's one ideal when there is not. If there are, for the sake of numbers, 3 trillion people on the planet, then that means there's 3 trillion spirits at that level of development to be human on the planet, and 3 trillion different superpowers that are not at full power on this planet, but can be one day. And with that vision of what we're here to do, it helps me understand why we're beating each other up and clashing. Not that I want to give up my ideals and beliefs or vote differently or believe differently, but it allows me to accept the other person as a child of God. It helps me to accept another movie genre as another way of expressing another point of view. It helps me understand the diversity and to find as best I can my way through this diversity in finding groups of people that tend to believe similarly to what I do, because it's nice to have companionship. But it is not necessary to be supported in absolutely everything I do. That's part of my inner reality, at least not on the planet Earth. Once I get to spirit, I think everybody should be on similar sides. But that's my summary of Pathwork Lecture 227, Change from Outer to Inner Laws in the New Age. I hope you take a look at it or listen to it. The recordings done by Gary Valbrach, his link is in my website. Some people are really keen on the audio. I can't do that. I read the lectures, but whatever works for you. There is also an original audio recording by Eva Paracas, the original lecture as it was given, that is for sale on the Pathwork site. They are usually the later lectures rather than the earlier ones because of technology and, frankly, the age of the tapes. So you'd have a chance to listen to her original lecture or an excellent professional recording of the lecture or to read it. But either way, hope you take a look. Thanks for listening.